Dear poets, now is the hour for me to, to send you this video before the day elapses, so that I can plant a few words, I hope, in your head about the great R.S. Thomas, Ronald Stewart Thomas. And maybe I'll read a couple of poems, particularly on the farm, which is for me one of the great poems ever. And the topic, of course, is always God, divine justice and divine injustice, the impossibility of easily loving a world that is the way the world is, and yet impossible to give up the idea, the importance of the need for the idea of God, and in that sense, his personage. If we need God so much, if his absence, which appears to be the case, if his absence is, as Thomas says, a gigantic presence, then we can't just slip around the whole issue and say, well, he's not there. If he's not there, why do we need him, apparently, so much? You may not. And I think one of the problems of offering you R.S. Thomas, as opposed to, let's say, Dylan Thomas, which will be his fellow Thomas, his fellow Welshman, should be really easy to consume. A wonderful poet, a poet of joy and of awareness of mortality deeply, but Thomas is a sterner test. I don't know how you feel about religion. I don't know how I felt about religion when I was more or less your age. I had not been raised in a faith. So I was free, not necessarily to be an atheist, but free to be an agnostic and free to search for my way, which didn't appear to contain any religion in it. And as time went by, it did, not organized religion, although I belonged to an organized religion, a small religion called the Moorish Orthodox Church, which you can find online. There's a great deal about us. But that's a recent outcrop of what has been, for me, a lifelong search for some sort of spiritual balance between the need to believe in something more than the material world, and yet at the same time the absence of any evidence of the presence of the Almighty, and certainly of his presence in religion. So Thomas is easy for me now, at my age and for many years now, to consume with joy and admiration for his struggle. For those of you who either have a religion, live in a religion, were raised in a religion, or have found one, his doubt may be difficult to assimilate. And those of you who happily and contentedly, more or less contentedly, have no religion, may not be interested in his struggle to encounter God in the terrible absence, the silence of his church, as he was a pastor, the silence of the church after everyone has left. Is God there? Is he alone? Is there somebody amid those stones, amid the shadows, amid the silence? Is there someone there? And the little fable almost that I told you in my email, that when he found one day, he was a countryman because he was a pastor of villages in the Welsh Hills, farmers in the Welsh Hills, and as he would, passing along through a field, a little depression, a little place of a little dip I'm searching for the word. There is one, and I've never quite known when telling this story how to describe it. There's just a little place where the grass is pressed down, and you know something was there. Someone was there. An animal was there. A hare. The hares live in those hedgerows, and Thomas saw the absent creature that would have been lying there as a hare, and feeling with his hands the warmth still present in the grass, that for him echoed so perfectly his relationship to the Almighty. It's almost as though, like a piece of graffiti, God was here, but now he's gone. There's that the warmth there in the grass is proof of the hare, the invisible hare, whom he cannot see. Hares are these enormous creatures. I can't imagine that you'd ever have seen one or necessarily even know what they are. They're like rabbits on steroids. They're big, and they bound across the landscape. Wonderful things, hares. So, run like a hare is what people say, rather than run like a leopard or a cheetah. Just run like a hare. They're very fast. So, and the Almighty is very fast in getting out of the way and failing to turn up for us. But that need to understand at that level the world, the universe, not necessarily to understand it as a created universe with a creator, but to understand the mystery of evil, of the awfulness in the world, in the natural world, and in the human world, and yet, our need, despite that, to believe that there is someone there that we could come face to face with, or get close enough, like putting your hand in the grass there, to feel their presence. So he writes that first poem I sent you called Via Negativa, the negative way. Why, no! I'm afraid you have to endure a bit of Welsh accent, because without the Welsh accent, these poems make little sense. He should really have written in Welsh, and he knew that. He was a traitor to his own country. He hated the English who colonized his land with little holiday cottages. But England and English was also his heritage, as it is yours, I may say, even if in a native way it's not really your first language, but it's an acquired language, as it was for Thomas, and it's a great language. That's what's important. It belonged to him. He can use it. He does not need to feel guilty about it. He uses it beautifully. English belongs to the world, not just to England. Why, no, he starts in the middle of a sentence. I never thought other than that God is that great absence in our lives. The empty silence within the place where we go seeking, not in hope to arrive or find. He keeps the interstices, the little gaps, in our knowledge, the darkness between stars. His are the echoes we follow, the footprints he has just left, like the hare. We put our hands in his side, an image that comes straight from the Bible, a rather wonderful and extraordinary one, hoping to find it warm. We look at people and places as though he had looked at them, but miss the reflection. It's wonderful. We do look at people and places as though they were emanations of the divine. If we don't at all, then life becomes, without our knowing it, desperately drab and cruel. It is cruel, and maybe it's drab, but there's a part of us that insists on seeing it as magical, which life also is. So the great poem for me is On the Farm. It's about a family, a sort of a retarded family, such as you find in the backwoods of every country. And he was a pastor in the backwoods of that little country of Wales that I've asked you to research. And here's the poem. There was Dai Pugh. Dai is Welsh for David. Pugh is a common name. There was Dai Pugh. He was no good. They put him in the fields to dock swedes. That's to cut the green parts off these root vegetables, swedes, and took the knife from him when he came home at late evening with a grin like the slash of a knife on his face. There was Hugh, Hugh is how that word is pronounced, and he was no good. Every evening after the ploughing with the big tractor, he would sit in his chair and stare into the tangled fire garden, opening his slow lips like a snail. There was Hugh Pew, too. What shall I say? I have heard him whistling in the hedges, on and on as though winter would never again leave these fields. And all the trees were deformed. And lastly, and here's the punchline of the poem, and lastly, there was the girl, beauty under some spell of the beast. Her pale face was the lantern by which they read the shrill phrase, God is love. I'm sorry, I missed that out because I lost my place and was remembering the poem rather than reading it. Her pale face was the lantern by which they read in life's dark book the shrill sentence, God is love. This is, for me, so magnificent because this family, presumably tremendously inbred and not entirely sane, and yet they labor at the fields, and their life is really pain upon pain, labor upon labor, and it's in life's dark book that they read because of this extraordinary, beautiful girl, their sister, who seems to sum up in herself all the beauty that was denied the three brothers. By her extraordinary presence in life's dark book, they read the sentence, and this terrible adjective applied to it, the shrill sentence, like a squeak, like an angry, like a hysterical sentence. God is love. So there, that sentence, God is love, so central to all religions, so incomprehensible when you come up against the awfulness of things, these three brothers struggling with the land and struggling with their souls, their sanity. You come up against that and you think God is love. Wonderful book of poems written after the concentration camps called God's Blind Eyes, Gottes blinde Augen, by a great poet. And she's making the simple point, where was God in Auschwitz? His eyes were blind to the horror. How could he have permitted it? He's all-powerful, and yet he did permit it. So life's book is dark, and yet we cling to the extraordinary proposition, God is love. And that sentence is shrill, a shriek in the face of reality. A sentence, a sound lacking the richness of serene truth. It's shrill, and yet it's there. God is love. So Thomas's poems, one after another, confront the oxymoron of belief, confront the paradox of somehow mysteriously needing the idea of a loving God, unable to reject the idea of a loving God in the face of a ghastly, at times, universe, ghastly and beautiful. And what are we to make of that? I love Thomas because that's the question he confronts all the time in his life and in his poetry, and I admire that greatly. I'm very moved by the mastery of that terrible issue in his poems, and I do wish you well of them. With great fondness, I sign off. Your Professor.